So we just looked at divine command theory. This view of morality tells us that what is right and wrong flows from a transcendent deity that is separate from us. And so we get our morality from God, right? And that's what makes something moral or immoral. Well, the view that we're going to look at now, you might say, is the complete opposite of that. This view is going to say, not only is there no objective standard of right and wrong, you shouldn't really give a shit about what some God you believe in says, or anyone for that matter. What you should do is you should look out for number one. You should follow your own code. We're going to be looking now at egoism. And to do that, we're going to look at the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, who is every 13-year-old boy's on Facebook favorite edgelord. Okay? Friedrich Nietzsche is an extremely important and influential figure in the history of philosophy. Okay? Genius guy, although his reputation has been tarred by the fact that his sister was associated with Nazi causes and took his writings after his death and basically Nazified them. So this guy doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to being a good person, being a righteous guy. But his views, his thoughts, his philosophy have come to deeply influence the Western philosophical tradition. Okay? He was a German philosopher, prose poet, philologist, cultural critic. Does anybody know what philology is? It has to do with the study of ancient languages and cultures. So, it sounds like race science. It's not race science, okay? That's something different. Nietzsche was very well versed in Latin, in Greek, in the ancient philosophers, their plays, their stories, their mythologies. And he's somebody whose philosophy shook up the Western world. Okay, because he had very profound things to say about the nature of Western society and where it was headed, including, for example, predicting the communist atrocities of the 20th century. This is something he actually predicted in his philosophy, which is weird. He studied ancient languages, history, all of the great philosophers, and religion. And as we'll see, he doesn't really have good things to say about religion in general or Christianity in particular. So in that way, this view is going to be very different than the divine command theory view we just looked at. He's critical of Christianity. He's critical of complacency and the collectivism that often motivates people to just submit themselves to some norm or rule. As we'll see, he's a very individualistic thinker, and he tries to push us to become individuals as well. Really influential guy. He's still influencing thinkers today, including, as we'll see, a lot of progressive political philosophy. How? Why? Well, at the bottom of progressive politics is this view that society is constructed on power games between different social groups. As we'll see, Nietzsche, who came up with this idea, greatly expanded that and actually made it a metaphysic, known as the will to power, which we're going to talk about here in a second. The first thing that you need to know about Nietzsche, if you're going to understand the kind of ethics that he follows, is that he's a naturalist. This is a view about the nature of reality. Naturalists think that all that exists is nature or a product of nature. In other words, naturalists don't believe that any supernatural things exist. According to naturalists, there are no gods, demons, angels, ghosts, spirits, none of that crap. All that exists is just natural or a product of nature. Atoms, trees, plants, animals, humans, all of these things are natural. They just come out of how nature has evolved. Okay? Thus, he's going to say, human beings were not created by some God. Our moralities are not, the moralities we try to follow are in error because there's no objective standard of right and wrong that exists outside of nature or that exists outside of our own minds. Rather, everything that exists is just a product of nature, including our thoughts, our desires, our beliefs, our social institutions, everything. So Nietzsche is going to be arguing against the existence of this objective standard of morality that exists separate from tables, chairs, human minds, and stuff. Okay, he's going to say no such thing exists. Stupid. All right? And there's also an aspect of his theory that is deeply evolutionary. He talks a lot about evolution and its connections to what the fundamental drive of all living organisms is. As we're going to see, Nietzsche doesn't have a very rosy picture of how nature works, and therefore of how human societies work. He thinks that everything that exists ultimately is undergirded by this thing called the will to power. All living things that exist, animals, plants, humans, what all of these organisms are trying to do, what they're fundamentally driven to do, is cultivate power and exercise that power on other things. To exploit, to take advantage, to dominate. That is what all things are driven to do. Take, for example, a plant. You're thinking, how can a plant dominate things? How does a plant have will to power? Well, how does a plant live and survive? It takes away the resources in its environment from other things for itself, making it grow stronger, bigger, and better. It's not afraid to grow over other plants to catch more of the sunlight, right? And snuff those other plants out. Animals definitely behave like this. Right? What does the lion do? The lion doesn't say, Mr. Gazelle, would you like to go find some food with me so we can survive? No, the lion eats the gazelle and takes what the lion wants for itself. Right? And he's going to say human beings are also motivated to do this same thing. To cultivate power and exercise that power. That's how this whole nature thing works. That's the principle that plants operate according to, animals, and human beings. This is what is driving everything. This is what is driving your behavior. This is what is driving your thoughts. This is what is driving the construction and operations of human society. And so what Nietzsche does in his philosophy, and this will to power is an example of this, is he tries to break apart our philosophical presuppositions. Tries to break apart our worldviews that we haven't interrogated ourselves. He tries to show us how a lot of the things that we believe in and follow, we're just doing because we're sheep. And we haven't actually thought about these things. He philosophizes with a hammer, you might say. A lot of his philosophy involved breaking apart some of the fundamental worldviews that 19th century society was based on, like Christianity, like the idea that there is an objective morality, like the idea that everybody should be equal and we should get rid of exploitation and oppression. And he just says, no, that's all bullshit. That's not how nature works. There's always going to be exploitation and oppression. You can't get rid of it. Get used to it. And if you want to make your life something, you got to go out there and fucking do that. If that means stomping on a few necks, they're the losers. Sucks for them. All right? And so what we're going to see in the kind of ethical theory that is implied by his philosophy is that we should become individuals make up our own minds about how we ought to live, and ultimately do what is good for us. We shouldn't just follow what our parents or professors or society tells us to do because it is good. We should actually think about these things for ourselves and make up our own damn mind. And not worry so much, okay, about people calling us bad, because that's what the losers are always going to say to the winners. All right? Do you want to be a loser or do you want to be a winner? And so to explore some of these themes, I asked you to look at some aphorisms in his book, Beyond Good and Evil. What is this book about? It's about Nietzsche trying to describe to humanity that there is a better life awaiting us beyond these moralities that we have just submitted ourselves to, that we have invented. Okay? In this book, he's trying to get people to see that these ideas of good and evil that we have are just fabrications. There is a better life waiting for us ahead if we have the courage to toss aside all of these myths that we keep telling ourselves and take what it is that we want for ourselves. We can become better and we can live happier if we get rid of some of these fictions. Most notably this idea that there's an objective standard that we should all be beholden to. In aphorisms 225 and 228, he makes some pretty damning critiques about people who believe in these moral systems, people who follow them, and people who say, you should be good and you should be nice and everybody should be equal. He doesn't think that these people who tell you that you ought to be good and nice are actually good and nice themselves. Okay? Why are people good and nice? Why do other people tell you to be good and nice? Nietzsche thinks the majority of the time it's because they're cowards. Why? They're afraid of what's going to happen to them if they break society's rules, and how people are going to think of them, and how people are going to treat them. They're operating from a fear mindset. Okay, these preachers of morality are cowards. And furthermore, that oftentimes following these systems of morality, like Christianity, deontology, utilitarianism, they make people worse off. Because what are you doing when you're following these systems of morality, when you're making them your God, when you're submitting to them? You're denying yourself opportunities to make yourself stronger, wealthier, happier. You're submitting yourself to something that is keeping you weak, that is keeping you complacent. You haven't actually thought through whether or not you should be a utilitarian or a deontologist or a Christian. You've just inherited this from society and you're following it because you're a herd animal. And that's what everybody else around you is doing too. And there's incentive to do that. One of the things that these moralities are going to prescribe is that we should establish equality among people. We should get rid of suffering. We should make it so that people have happy, comfortable lives and they don't have to want for anything. Nietzsche thinks we probably couldn't make a bigger mistake than to try to eliminate suffering. Why? Because suffering is the thing that is responsible for all of the great things humanity has ever done and invented. For example, why did we invent the wheel? Because humanity ran up against a problem and it was suffering. Why did we invent the axle? Why did we invent the transistor? The steam engine, all of these different things? It's because we were faced with conflict, faced with adversity, we were suffering, and on account of trying to surpass that suffering, we used our awesome capacities to transform the world. Suffering, Nietzsche says, is the catalyst for all of the great things that we do. Suffering builds character. Suffering produces invention. Suffering is responsible for these explosions of knowledge and awesome transforming of society that we get to enjoy today. Trying to get rid of suffering is stupid and foolish. Suffering makes you better, stronger, and wiser, and gives you opportunity to do awesome things. If you got rid of suffering, you would never do anything great ever again. You'd be stuck in this comfortable life of consumption and conformity. So this ideal of eliminating suffering, bad, bad, bad. That's one of the reasons why these systems of morality are bad, bad, bad. From his point of view, right? He's not saying they're objectively bad. He's saying, look, they're holding you back. All right? One of the things that he talks about a lot in his philosophy is what's called the death of God. Has anybody heard this? Heard this phrase? He's not literally talking about God dying. What he's talking about is this trend that was occurring during the time in which he was living, and that is occurring, perhaps has occurred today, which is the founding worldviews and ideas that Western society is based on, people are starting to lose faith in. On account of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, humanity has lost faith in Christianity, in the Christian worldview that has motivated them and provided explanations for how things are the way they are up until that point in human history. Nietzsche thinks that people in Western society built society so strongly on this Christian worldview that now, because people are losing faith in it and aren't believing in it anymore, they're really suffering. Look at what happens when somebody loses their faith. They become nihilistic, right? Depressed. They don't think there's anything to live for. When your fundamental belief system and worldview gets destroyed, blown up by arguments, by science, by other pieces of evidence, you don't feel happy. You feel stuck, lost, depressed, and nihilistic. And he was saying that this was happening during his own time. Okay? And it's happening today. Are people happy in Western society? Are people fundamentally motivated by some purpose and meaning that they're chasing and that helps them persevere through life? No, everybody's fucking upset and unhappy, right? Nietzsche's like, duh, this was going to happen because we built our society on this dumb worldview. And we believed in it. We believed in it so strongly that now that the rug has been ripped out from underneath us, we're really suffering. But what he's trying to do in his philosophy is tell us that there is a path forward if we are strong enough to take it. That path is forsaking the myths and the worldviews that we built society on and forming something new for ourselves. Yes?
Did he say that this was happening in his own time?
Yeah.
Like that early on?
Yeah, well, think about it. One of the things that he's going to say is, on account of what happened during the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, where we started making all these advances in science, that caused people to believe in Christianity less, didn't it? Yeah. And so one of the reasons why he's so critical of Christianity is because he's like, this dumb religion was responsible for its own undoing. Because what motivated those Enlightenment scientists to discover what the world was like and figure it all out? Well, they were trying to understand why God made things the way he did. A lot of these scientists were fundamentally Christian, and that was their primary motivation for engaging in scientific enterprise. And so he's like, this whole Christianity thing, look at what it did. It undercut itself. That's why we shouldn't follow it. It's not a useful, good philosophy. It's not going to take us to good places. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, but how does him being from Germany affect that?
Well, he saw this happening during his time, right? He probably had experiences talking with people who had lost their faith. He had lost his own faith. His father was a Lutheran pastor, and he was raised in the church. But he sure wasn't Christian when he died. You know, so he had lived through this himself. He saw the social currents, things changing. And he said, look, this is coming for other societies as well. This is going to be a problem in the future. We need to talk about this and we need to face it. Here's what he has to say about these moral systems. Okay? I'm going to try to read it in passionate fashion. To refrain mutually from injury, from violence, from exploitation, and put one's will on a par with that of others, this may result in a certain rough sense in good conduct among individuals when the necessary conditions are given. As soon, however, as one wished to take this principle more generally, and if possible even as the fundamental principle of society, it would immediately disclose what it really is, namely a will to the denial of life, a principle of dissolution and decay. Here one must think profoundly to the very basis and resist all sentimental weakness. Life itself is essentially appropriation, injury, conquest of the strange and weak, suppression, severity, obtrusion of peculiar forms, incorporation, and, at the least, putting it mildest, exploitation. This is how everything works according to him. Life fundamentally is exploitative. But why should one forever use precisely these words, on which for ages a disparaging purpose has been stamped? Even the organization within which, as was previously supposed, the individuals treat each other as equal. It takes place in every healthy aristocracy. Must itself, if it be a living and not a dying organization, do all that towards other bodies, which the individuals within it refrain from doing to each other, it will have to be the incarnated will to power. It will endeavor to grow, to gain ground, attract to itself, and acquire ascendancy, not owing to any morality or immorality, but because it lives, and because life is precisely will to power. On no point, however, is the ordinary consciousness of Europeans more unwilling to be corrected than on this matter. People now rave everywhere, even under the guise of science, about coming conditions of society in which the exploiting character is to be absent. That sounds to my ears as if they promise to invent a mode of life which should refrain from all organic functions. Exploitation does not belong to a depraved or imperfect and primitive society. It belongs to the nature of the living being as a primary organic function. It is a consequence of the intrinsic will to power, which is precisely the will to life. Granting that as a theory, this is a novelty. As a reality, it is the fundamental fact of all history. Let us be so far honest towards ourselves. So these moralities, these worldviews that we have, they tell us exploitation is bad. This isn't how life is supposed to work. We should all be nice to each other and be equal. And Nietzsche's like, that's based on a fucking lie. Life essentially involves exploitation, dominance, winners and losers. We're not going to be able to get rid of it. To try to eliminate suffering and exploitation would be to eliminate life itself. And that cannot and should be done. What a foolish thing to try to do. So for Nietzsche, what it means to be a living thing and cultivating and exercising power, exploiting, dominating, these are inextricably linked. You can't have one without the other. But he goes on. He asserts all living things are driven by this will to power. That is, all living things wish to cultivate more power for themselves and exercise that power against other things. What does the plant do? In order to grow strong itself, it takes away nutrients in the environment from other plants and animals and incorporates it into itself and makes itself strong and grows nice and tall. The plant doesn't feel bad, nor does it should, that it's blocking out the sunlight from other plants. That's what it means to live as a plant. You grow tall and strong so that you can survive. This is what it means to be an animal. What does the bird do? The bird doesn't nicely go around and try to make everything equal. No, the bird eats the bugs. Okay? That's how the bird grows strong and takes care of its young. It needs to kill. It needs to harvest and take from the environment and make it its own. And this is how humans work too. This is what undergirds human society. Right? Nietzsche is going to say, the reason things are the way they are in society is because people are trying to cultivate and exercise power over others. Look no further than our own government, perhaps, to see that this is true. Are they interested in helping the American people or strengthening their own power and wealth? Well, I'll let you figure that out. Nature works this way, and because society is just a product of nature, ultimately, because humans are a product of nature, right? We're just another animal like a dog is, or a primate, maybe a more smart animal, but we're just an animal, we're just a part of nature. Society works this way too. There is no eliminating exploitation, suffering, poverty, oppression. Impossible. This is what it means to be a living thing. To eliminate all that stuff, you'd have to eliminate life itself. And so, though it might be nice to have these social and political goals of making everybody equal and redistributing capital, Nietzsche is going to say, that is a fool's errand. What are the people going to do once the capital is redistributed? They're just going to go on trying to dominate others, increase their own wealth, hold others down. Because that's how life works, people. Nietzsche's trying to shout this from the rooftops, okay? He's like, y'all are lying to yourselves. At bottom, Nietzsche performs what we might call a genealogy of morality. That is, he tries to describe where our systems of morality came from, why we have the ones that we do. And he basically categorizes all systems of morality into two categories. He says that there are master moralities and slave moralities. If we go back through history and we try to figure out where morality came from, we will recognize that some moral systems were created by those in power, and some moral systems were created by those who were under the thumbs of others. And these moral systems function differently, and they have different goals, and they're based on different things. Master moralities are moralities defined by the ruling class. That is, those who have power, wealth, resources, who are in positions of authority and status. Way back when, it would have been those who are strong, right? That nobody could stand up to, big, fast. Master moralities are concerned with excellence, strength, and power. People who follow and imbibe master moralities are trying to further their own ends, become stronger, become wiser, cultivate more power for themselves. And they don't have a second thought about using that power to achieve their own ends, if that means taking something away from another person. Because that's how life works, okay? Nietzsche equates these masters with strong individuals who believe and do what they want. They are driven by self-glorification. They follow their own code. They don't let the norms of society or the sufferings of others prevent them from achieving their goals. Okay? They are the winners. They are the conquerors. It's not nice, but this is how it works, Nietzsche is saying. In some sense, Nietzsche is calling us all to be masters if we actually care about achieving our goals and surviving. The other class of moralities are what he calls slave morality. And he's not talking literally about enslavement here. He's just talking about moralities that come from people in power and moralities that come from people who are not in power. All right? He's not talking about literal slavery. All right? Slave moralities are those that are defined by the ruled, those who are not in positions of power and authority. The plebeians, the masses, the people who allow others to walk all over them, that don't stand up to their oppressors, that don't fight. Those who are violated, oppressed, unfree, who have to live according to the whims and desires of those who do have power and are not afraid to exercise it. These moralities are concerned with justice, equality, fairness. Why? Because they don't have the power and they want the power. So they're going to say things like, you masters, you capitalists, whatever you are, you should be nice to everybody and you should be just and fair. Because they're too afraid and cowardly to go and take power for themselves. So they make all these moral claims about things being objectively good and objectively evil. And they're like, you guys are evil up there. You got to be nicer to us. And the masters are just like, we don't give a fucking shit about you. Like, we're going to do what we want. If you want it, come and take it. Try it. But the slaves are too cowardly and weak to try it. Nietzsche equates the average person with being a slave in this regard, and is following a slave morality. Somebody who is a sheep, okay? Who just does what society tells them to do. Who doesn't think for themselves. Who allows other people's perceptions and views of the world to constrain them and hold them back. The sheep believes and does what others want them to do. If you're in college, just because your parents want you to be in college and you're afraid of disappointing them, Nietzsche's going to say, you're being a fucking sheep. You should do what you want to do. Stand up to your parents. Don't be a cowardly, weak person. He thinks that the people that have been ruled historically, that have not had the power, invented the concepts of good and evil to try to take power away from those who were above them. That is where our moralities come from. They're ultimately based on resentment by people who just want more power for themselves, but can't take it or are afraid to take it. Thus, they want to usurp the role and power of the masters, and to do that, they invented systems of morality. Thus, to summarize, nature is red in tooth and claw. It's all about winners and losers. The lion doesn't do something evil when the lion eats the gazelle. That's how nature works. We should also believe the same thing about human society. Okay? Because we're just like the lion or the gazelle, depending on how we're living and acting. Okay? Everything is natural, so there is no objective, mind-independent standard of what's moral and immoral. We should not merely believe and do what others want. No, we should figure out things for ourselves. We should be a free thinker. We should do what we want. Forget living by what other people want and their ideas of you. Be a strong, independent person. Be an individual. Thus, Nietzsche urges us to become individuals and follow our own code, something that we have come up with ourselves after we've thought about it and really interrogated our beliefs, desires, and goals. Thus, we could say he promotes a kind of egoism. This is the view that the morality of an action is ultimately based on whether that action promotes one's own desires, interests, and ends. That is, what's good is what's good for you. What's good is what's good for me. Okay? If me giving you all Fs is going to increase my power and make me wealthier, Nietzsche's like, you got to do that, man. Yeah, screw your students. If you cheating in this class is what's going to help you gain more power for yourself and opportunity, Nietzsche's going to say, yeah, you cheat, you do it good. Okay? Does this view make sense? It's kind of an edgy view, right? Spicy. Do y'all like it? Or do you dislike it? Yeah, Georgia.
Certainly something. I just think it's really telling that he went crazy and had dementia. He was miserable his whole life.
Yeah. So he's somebody who did struggle with illness his whole life, and especially at the end of his life, yeah, he did lose his mind.
So I don't
Do you think it's because of this philosophy? But historians think he lost his mind probably because he had untreated syphilis. So.
I was reading a little about Nietzsche, but I think within that series, I think at some point he just lost his head and talked about killing time or
I don't know about that part, but yeah, people said he did go crazy at the end of his life. Yeah.
I think